This video contrasts the perceived beauty of boat life during winter to the reality of boat life during winter. Let's get stuck in. At the beginning of December, we were treated to some absolutely stunning scenes as bitterly cold temperatures turned boat life into a winter wonderland. It was so cold, in fact, that stretches of water I had never seen frozen in over a decade since I moved onto my first boat finally found themselves covered in sheets of ice. But even at that point, while I was posting these amazing scenes, I was trying to raise the alarm about people falling into the trap of believing that this was the reality of a lovely calm winter on a boat, whereas the reality looks a lot more like this. You are far more likely to face a lot of wetter but milder days, and this can turn into a prolonged attritional winter where it gets wetter and muddier and wetter and muddier, and if you don't get some freezing cold temperatures to solidify and freeze these muddy towpaths solid, then you'll find that as time goes on, if the towpaths turn to this sort of mud initially during the winter months, as the ground gets saturated, those muddy towpaths turn to really slippy, wet towpaths where you've got the mud that's turned incredibly loose, and then you've got standing water on top of it to make the worst possible environment, given how uneven and often slanted these canal towpaths can be, that it's basically the worst environment to walk on right next to a very cold canal. And it's something that I know that there's some people that I wouldn't want to see try and tackle these towpaths in certain weather conditions. Another important factor that is often underestimated or overlooked when considering the reality of the boat life experience during winter is that you are not only likely to be facing these very unpleasant weather conditions for a lot of that period, but you're going to be doing so at a point in the year where you have got the longest nights and the shortest daylight hours, and this can create a really miserable scenario. It's something that I have briefly touched on in other videos, and after doing so, been amazed at how many people would mention in comments or in messages or even out and about on the towpath in person how they feel that themselves and a lot of other people like to massively overestimate their own, I suppose you could call it, mental fortitude, and not consider that if you're out in these bitterly wet, cold, miserable conditions down a lonely old towpath, and you're doing so when it's very often getting dark before 4:30 in the evening, that being sat on a boat out in these conditions can certainly take its toll on your general mood and good spirits. And it is something that I know from personal experience, like I've said previously, part of the contributing factors to why I left boat life years ago. Admittedly, I came back to boat life in less than 2 years' time, but it was because I was living on a little boat during a historically wet winter, and not only was I constantly getting soaked and muddy every time I went anywhere at all, but I was also doing so and getting back onto the boat often in the dark, and then sitting around twiddling my thumbs thinking, what am I going to do tomorrow? Oh, nothing, because it's forecasting rain all day again. And again, I can laugh and joke and try and sort of put a little bit of a slightly less dire twist on this, but the reality is that I know and have spoken to people who have given up boat life because the winters were just too soul-crushing, I suppose, and completely outweighed all of the positives and the enjoyment of the lifestyle during other periods of the year. And that's a completely and utterly legitimate reason to give up boat life, and a completely and utterly legitimate reason to want a more enjoyable experience, whether that's boating, living in a caravan, living in a van, living in a house. Now, I would personally say that this is partly why I've been concerned and posting some videos recently trying to put across this far more realistic view of boat life, because I feel that with the popularity and the cost of living, etc., there are people now looking to boat life as the solution and the cure for modern life and unhappiness and pressures of finance and so on, and that is creating a potential, I don't know what you'd say, like a time bomb of boaters who in 2 years' time are going to be sat on some very expensive boats that they've had made brand new and all very nice and fancy. Don't get me wrong, lovely boats I've seen recently, a lot of new boats I feel, but when the reality of boat life kicks in, and if the price of boats does settle itself or go down, you're going to have a lot of people with some very expensive boats that have devalued an awful lot in a short period of time. But perhaps I'm totally wrong, and it's sad that it is very unpopular for me to say these things on video, even with a decade of experience of being out and about on the canals, because people only want to hear positive stuff that reinforces their views, and it's something that I've had messages and got earache about being too negative, when I love boat life, I love all this stuff. I'm looking to buy a third boat as we speak before I've even sold the second boat, yet still that's not enough to qualify me to say, hang on a minute, let's just think sensibly about this before everybody runs out and gets onto these very, very fancy boats, or not so fancy boats, like my little boat is. Let's just consider what's the reality. Let's not get too caught up in the absolutely beautiful, wonderful world of summer days on a boat and snowy days on a boat, and let's think most of the time the weather is neither beautiful summer nor frozen winter wonderland. But again, these are just my humble opinions and my humble views on the world, and there's a lot of stuff I could go into that I've spoken about in recent videos about obviously the increased cost of heating the boat with a wood or coal burning fire, the increased costs going on throughout, well, everything we know in life basically. But of course, boat specific, you've got obviously the boat licenses and things like that going up, as well as the price of boats themselves. Ultimately though, I've got to say I still love it and I still think it's a great lifestyle, but as I've always said, almost anybody could live on a boat, but not everybody would enjoy it. Anyway, my dear friends, at the risk of wittering on and then getting people telling me I'm being too depressing, I'm going to cut this video short here and say my thank yous and goodbyes. I'd like to just say a very brief thank you to all the channel members and PayPal supporters of recent times. I know I've been quiet since December, but I'm back now, and if you haven't had an email off me, then you could well be having one very soon, so thank you for the support. Please do, everybody else, check out my short boat life books available as a paperback and for the Kindle, and please do check out sortofinteresting.com, as I do actually post little articles about boat life and a lot of lovely photos over there. Until the next time, my friends, keep it interesting, keep it boat worthy, have a fantastic day, and of course, farewell.